It took exactly 9 minutes and 31 seconds. 9 minutes for a former prosecutor to systematically dismantle the architect of America's most controversial immigration policies. Stephen Miller thought he was prepared. He had briefing books, legal teams, talking points memorized. What he didn't expect was that Kamala Harris had brought something far more dangerous. The receipts. The Hart Senate office building felt different that morning in March 2025. Room 216 had hosted countless oversight hearings, but the energy today was electric, almost predatory. Press gallery packed beyond capacity. 3 major networks carrying it live. Social media already buzzing with speculation about what would happen when Trump's senior advisor came face to face with the woman he'd spent years attacking. Stephen Miller entered at exactly 10:15 a.m., walking like a man who had survived countless political battles. Navy suit pressed perfectly, American flag pin gleaming under the harsh committee lights, leather briefcase containing 3 folders of prepared responses. Behind him, a phalanx of White House lawyers took their positions, ready to invoke executive privilege at the first sign of danger. But danger was already in the room. Kamala Harris sat in the front row, not at the committee table, but in the witness section. She wasn't here as a senator anymore. She was here as something more dangerous, a special witness invited by the Democratic majority to provide testimony about the human cost of policies Miller had personally designed. She wore a dark blazer, minimal jewelry, prosecutor mode fully activated. Her hands rested calmly on a thick manila folder marked Classified Family Separation Evidence. Those watching closely noticed Miller's eyes kept drifting to that folder, like a defendant watching a prosecutor's briefcase that might contain the evidence that destroys him. If this caught your attention, stay with us. Follow and turn on notifications. You'll want to see what comes next. Chairman Dick Durbin called the session to order with unusual formality. Today, we examine the Trump administration's family separation policies, their implementation, and their continuing impact on American families. Mr. Miller has been called to explain his role. Vice President Harris has been invited to provide testimony on what she discovered during oversight of these programs. The word oversight hung in the air like a threat. Miller took his seat at the witness table, adjusting his microphone with the practiced ease of someone who had testified dozens of times. He looked confident, too confident. The first hour proceeded exactly as expected. Republican committee members asked softball questions about border security. Miller delivered polished answers about necessary enforcement and rule of law. Democratic members pressed harder, but Miller had prepared for their attacks, deflecting with bureaucratic language about operational necessities and legal frameworks. But Kamala Harris hadn't asked a single question yet. She just sat there watching, taking notes, letting Miller grow comfortable with the rhythm of friendly questions and hostile but expected attacks. And then, at exactly 11:23 a.m., Chairman Durbin announced, "The committee now recognizes former Vice President Harris for testimony and questioning." The room's energy shifted instantly. Harris stood slowly, deliberately, gathering her papers with the methodical precision of someone who had prosecuted hundreds of cases. She walked to the center of the room, positioning herself not behind a desk but standing directly in Miller's sightline, exactly as she would have positioned herself in a courtroom to question a hostile witness. "Mr. Miller," she began, her voice carrying that distinctive prosecutorial tone that had destroyed Senate nominees and corporate executives alike. "Thank you for being here today. I want to start by establishing some basic facts." Miller nodded, probably grateful for what seemed like a reasonable opening. You served as senior advisor to President Trump from 2017 to 2021, correct? That's correct. And you returned to that same position when President Trump was re-elected in 2024. Yes. And during both terms, you were the principal architect of immigration policy, including the family separation policy implemented in 2016. Is that accurate? Miller's lawyer leaned forward to whisper something, but Miller waved him off. I was one of several advisors involved in immigration policy, yes. Harris smiled slightly, the kind of smile prosecutors give when a witness has just walked into a trap they don't see yet. One of several, she repeated, writing something on her notepad. Mr. Miller, are you familiar with White House Internal Memo WH 2018-0847? The question was so specific, so detailed, that Miller's confident expression flickered for just a moment. I'd need to see the specific document. Of course. Harris opened her manila folder and pulled out a document, holding it up so the cameras could capture it clearly. This is a memo dated April 3, 2018, from you to Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen. Let me read just the subject line. Recommendation for enhanced enforcement through family unit separation. The words, family unit separation, echoed through the silent chamber. Do you remember writing this memo, Mr. Miller? Miller's jaw tightened. I wrote numerous memos on various policy options. That's not what I asked. Harris's voice sharpened, decades of courtroom experience coming through. Did you write this specific memo recommending family separation as an enforcement tool? Yes or no? The lawyer whispered urgently again. Miller took a slow drink of water, clearly stalling. I would need to review the full context. Mr. Miller. Harris cut him off with surgical precision. This memo has your electronic signature. It was sent from your White House email account. It contains specific recommendations for separating children from parents at the border. Did you write it? The silence stretched for exactly 8 seconds. Reporters counted them. Yes. The admission hit the room like a physical force. But Harris wasn't done. She was just getting started. Thank you for your honesty, she said, though her tone carried no gratitude. Now, let me read you something from page 3 of your memo. Quote, the separation of family units will serve as an effective deterrent to illegal border crossings. The message that children will be removed from their parents will spread rapidly through migrant communities and significantly reduce attempts to enter the United States illegally. End quote. She looked up from the document, her eyes locked on Miller's face. Mr. Miller, did you understand when you wrote those words that you were recommending using children as weapons? That you were proposing to traumatize thousands of kids to send a message? Miller's face flushed red. That's a gross mischaracterization. Is it? Harris pulled out another document. Let me show you what your deterrent strategy actually looked like. She held up a photograph. Even from across the room, everyone could see it. A small child crying in a cage-like detention facility. This is 4-year-old Mariana. She was separated from her mother for 87 days because of your policy. 87 days, Mr. Miller. She was 4 years old. Miller tried to maintain composure. These facilities were designed to be temporary. Harris cut him off again. Temporary? Her voice rose slightly, controlled anger breaking through professional restraint. Let me read you something else. This is from a pediatrician's report filed with HHS in August 2018. She began reading, her voice steady but carrying the weight of each word. Child exhibits signs of severe psychological trauma, refuses to eat, nightmares every night, repeatedly calls for mama. Separation has caused documented developmental regression. She looked up. That was Mariana's medical evaluation after 30 days. She had 57 more days to go. The gallery was completely silent. Several reporters had stopped typing, just watching. Mr. Miller, Harris continued, pulling out document after document. I have 247 similar medical reports. 247 children who suffered documented trauma because you decided their pain was an acceptable price for your deterrent message. Miller's lawyers were frantically passing notes, but he ignored them. His face had gone from red to pale. Vice President Harris, immigration enforcement requires difficult decisions. Difficult decisions? Harris's voice carried genuine incredulity now. Mr. Miller, I spent years as a prosecutor. I made difficult decisions every single day, but I never, not once, thought traumatizing children was an acceptable law enforcement tool. She walked closer to the witness table, and Miller actually leaned back slightly. Let me ask you something personal, Mr. Miller. Do you have children? His lawyer immediately objected. That's not relevant. But Miller answered anyway. No. No, Harris repeated quietly. You don't have children, but you felt qualified to design a policy that would traumatize thousands of them. The accusation hung in the air. Let me tell you what I discovered during my oversight work, Harris continued, her voice growing stronger. I visited those detention facilities you created. I spoke to those children. I looked into their eyes and saw terror that will stay with them for the rest of their lives. She pulled out another photo. This is 6-year-old Carlos, separated from his father for 134 days. When they were finally reunited, he didn't recognize him, his own father, Mr. Miller. The trauma was so severe that he had blocked out his father's face. Miller tried to speak. The policy was ended. After 2,014 children had been separated. Harris's voice cracked like a whip. 2,814 kids, Mr. Miller. And do you know how many were reunited with their families within the 30-day guideline your own memo established? She paused, letting the question echo. 7. 7 children out of 2,014. The number landed like a bomb. Where are the others? Harris demanded. Some are still separated today, in 2025. 7 years later, Mr. Miller. 7 years, and we still haven't found all the parents, because your administration didn't keep records. You traumatized kids, and you didn't even keep track of them. Miller's hands were shaking now, gripping his water glass like a lifeline. The policy was implemented by DHS, not based on your recommendation. Harris held up the memo again. This came from you. You wrote it. You advocated for it. You pushed it through. And when cabinet members expressed concerns, you called them weak. I have those emails too. She pulled out another stack of papers. Here's your email to Kirstjen Nielsen when she expressed hesitation. If we're serious about border security, we can't let concerns about optics prevent us from necessary enforcement actions. Optics, Mr. Miller. You called the mass traumatization of children an optics problem? The press gallery was in chaos now, reporters frantically typing, cameras zooming in on Miller's increasingly distressed face. But Harris still wasn't finished. Let me read you one more thing, she said, her voice dropping to a quieter, more devastating tone. This is from a letter written by Maria Santos, one of the mothers whose child was taken. She wrote this while she was detained, not knowing where her 5-year-old daughter was. Harris began reading, her voice steady but emotional. Every night I pray someone is holding my baby when she cries. I pray someone is telling her that Mama loves her. I pray she remembers me. Please, God, let her remember me. The room was absolutely silent. Harris looked up, tears visible in her eyes, but her voice still controlled. Maria was detained for 67 days before she saw her daughter again. 67 days of not knowing if her child was alive, safe, or being comforted. All because you decided her suffering was an acceptable deterrent. Miller opened his mouth, but no words came out. One final question, Mr. Miller. Harris walked directly to the witness table, standing just feet from him. If you could go back to April 2018, knowing everything that happened, knowing the trauma, knowing the families still not reunited, knowing the nightmares those children still have. She paused. Would you still write that memo? The question hung in the absolute silence of the chamber. Every camera was locked on Miller's face. Every reporter's pen was poised. Every person in the room was holding their breath. Miller looked at Harris, then at the photos of the children spread across the table, then back at Harris. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. He stopped, started again. The goal was to secure the border. That's not what I asked, Harris said quietly. Would you do it again? Yes or no? 8 seconds of silence. I believed it was necessary at the time. That's not a no, Harris said, her voice carrying equal parts sadness and anger. You can't even say no. After everything, after all these children, after all this trauma, you still can't say you were wrong. She gathered her papers slowly, deliberately. I'm done with this witness, Mr. Chairman. He's told us everything we need to know. As Harris walked back to her seat, the chamber erupted. Reporters rushed for exits to file their stories. Congressional staff members frantically whispered into phones. Cable news networks were already running the clips. And Stephen Miller sat frozen at the witness table, his career in ruins, destroyed not by partisan attacks or political theater, but by the simple, devastating presentation of his own words and their horrific consequences. The hearing would continue for another hour, but it didn't matter. The moment was over. The damage was done. In exactly 9 minutes and 31 seconds, Kamala Harris had done what no one else had managed. She had made Stephen Miller accountable for the policy that would define his legacy forever. And the cameras had captured every second of it. This wasn't the end. Subscribe and turn on notifications. More evidence is coming. This dramatized account is inspired by real events and public figures. All dialogue and incidents are fictionalized for commentary and educational purposes, while exploring themes of financial accountability and justice.